rapidly changing world where technology, regulatory hurdles and changing market conditions keep corporate India on its toes, there is a new breed of professional that corporate India is betting on. A professional risk and insurance manager. Managing a company's risk and insurance portfolio is a challenging task for this corporate warrior, given the oftentimes competing interests of numerous internal stakeholders in a complex insurance market. So how do they go about charting their path? To shed more light on the subject, we caught up with the Joint Managing Director of Prudent Insurance Brokers, Pavanjit Singh Dhingra.
So Pavan, to kick off the conversation, given that the risk landscape across corporate India is evolving rapidly, and given the sheer range of new age risks now emerging, how well equipped is the modern day risk manager to handle the onslaught?
It's a good question. I think you look at the newspaper headlines. You have an earthquake in Turkey, you have floods in Los Angeles.
Right.
You have land going downhill in Uttarakhand. You have floods every year in cities that never had floods before. And you have data today in every shape and form, whether it's personal or it's company, somewhere in the cloud.
Of course.
With all these changes, I think a risk manager who 10 years ago was largely concerned with managing physical risk. I think the risk manager has to be better equipped to understand the changing world, the role of risk in the changing world, how things work together, and how different parts of the organization now need to work as a team to handle these continuous changes.
Well, absolutely. And you bring up an excellent point, because risk in a corporate context, of course, spans many forms, many avatars. Some of those risks are, of course, insurable. Some are partially insurable. And some are not insurable in the least, right? So how well equipped is that risk manager who oftentimes has a very small department or a very lean team at his or her disposal to handle that? And what needs to change to broaden the scope?
So, a lot of risk management was done either by the finance department or the procurement in a lot of companies.
Traditionally.
Now, I think companies are realizing that times are changing. Companies are getting bigger. Business is getting more complex. And I think the pandemic has shown everyone how disconnected supply chains and ecosystems can become very suddenly.
Right.
With all of this in mind, I think the good risk manager today has a very good understanding of what is pure risk and disconnected from insurance. So insurance is just transfer of risk.
It is.
But understanding what is the net risk left on the balance sheet of a company, managing that and making sure all stakeholders are aligned within the organization that, guys, this is on our balance sheet. We need to manage this. You can't buy insurance for this. So we need to take care of it. So this is a very important change that is happening, and the quantum of uninsurable risk is actually growing as our world gets more complex.
Well, to build on that, if I were to take the conversation in the direction of technology for a moment, and you've got cutting-edge technologies like big data, machine learning, artificial intelligence, truly permeating this space, especially in the context of compliance risk or regulatory risk. But do they truly serve as a substitute for the human touch and aligning all stakeholders, as you mentioned?
It's virtually impossible today to manage regulatory or compliance risk without using some sort of technology. But at the end of the day, managing risk is all about the culture of a company. The culture of a company comes from the very top.
It does.
Are we managing compliance as a checkbox, or are we managing compliance because we really want to?
Right.
All these technologies are great tools, but it doesn't substitute for a great culture, a great leadership direction, and a great team to manage the nitty-gritty and deliver results using tools. So good companies have the best tools. It makes their life a lot easier, but great companies also have great leaders.
They find that balance. So, sir, when you talk about great leadership, right, what's the key for top management to create a more risk-aware culture within the four walls of their organization? And how can they better nurture risk management professionals to grow and achieve that next level of success within the company?
Risk was really equated with insurance. So you had a risk management function, which was really an insurance buying function.
Of course.
That has changed. So I think regulation has a lot to do with it. enterprise risk management is something that needs to be reported at the board level now. And it's like the seatbelt example I like to give. We all know that wearing a seatbelt is great and it's important. But until the police started fining us 1,100 rupees for not wearing a seatbelt, none of us really did that. So I think regulatory and compliance risk is pretty much the same. I think the government has a very important role to play in making sure that there are effective laws and effective regulations that get implemented. And then that builds a culture, not just within organizations, but within the nation. Because at the end of the day, what are we talking about? We're talking about resilience.
We are.
So that's the real end result, what we're looking for, is resilience. Can we bounce back?
So as a part of this conversation, I can't help but notice the rising profile of that in-house insurance officer. That individual who manages the entire insurance portfolio for his or her company. To what extent has that role become a differentiator or a game changer in this space?
So how this has really changed is that, first of all, in the last decade, India has grown its economy. We're talking about becoming a $5 trillion economy. And as a result, our companies are getting a lot larger. Our companies are getting a lot more complex. Right. They're growing not just within India, but across the world. Today, I understand that there would be around 1,000 odd professionals in corporate India. We believe that as India moves towards becoming a $10 trillion economy, we're talking about maybe 10 or 15,000 such professionals within corporate India. And this is a great profile, and it's going to keep increasing with time.
Well, Pavanjit, I've got a follow-up question for you there. Do you believe that risk management standards in India are on par with those of our global counterparts, or does something truly need to change here?
So I think this is true for anything in India. The best companies or the best standards are absolutely world-class. But there is a whole SME and MSME section out there, where the standards are definitely, whether it's building standards, construction codes, fire safety, distance from the building from the wall. Is there sufficient space for a fire truck to really get inside? Various things like that. So those are areas that, like anything else in India, I think requires regulation, requires some government push. And as I said, we're talking about creating a culture. We're talking about creating the ability to be resilient, to bounce back. And, that requires, I think, Big Brother to take some steps.
Well, that makes for a great segue into my next question, because I'm curious to understand if you believe that this increased profile of that insurance department that's in-house, or this risk management function, is essentially a knee-jerk reaction to the pandemic. Is this a knee-jerk reaction to recent geopolitical developments, or do you believe the trend is here to stay?
Well, the trend is absolutely here to stay. There's no doubt about it. And it's here to stay, and it's here to accelerate. And it's simply because of the complex nature of the world. There is no doubt that the pandemic has hastened the speed at which these changes are taking place. Because it was a shock, and a shock forces you to relook at things, relook at your assumptions. But as I said, we are going from 3 to 5 trillion, from 5 to 10 trillion. Our companies are becoming really, really large, world-scale companies. I think our largest companies employ 500,000 to 1 million people today.
Right.
It's a complex company, and that requires very serious risk management approaches to keeping the company safe and resilient.
Well, since you're talking numbers, what's your comment on the affordability of existing corporate insurance plans or existing risk management or risk transfer solutions available in the marketplace?
India is, ironically, I believe, to be one of the most cost-effective insurance markets in the world. Our consumers definitely would like something cheaper, but at the same time, if you look at what our clients pay for insurance overseas, what they pay in India is actually a fraction of what they have to spend overseas. But it's also a function. Your premiums are also a function of the risk that is emerging in our country, the cost of managing risk. And as our economy prospers, I think it is an open debate whether the cost of insurance and risk transfer will reduce as volumes increase, or maybe even increase as costs increase.
Well, Pavanjit, if I could ask you to draw from your own personal or professional experience, what are some of the risk management frameworks that you consider to be most innovative or most progressive?
So there's one legendary risk manager who's managing the risk of a large pharmaceutical company in India. And, so to start with, he manages their global risk. And he is broken down the things that his department needs to do at the absolute granular level. So they track more than 10,000 unique items that they need to accomplish during the year. And that calendar is built out day-wise.
Phenomenal.
At the beginning of the year. And there's such a big book, so they know exactly what they need to do, and now they've built a software around it.
Sure.
So that's the operational part, but what that does is that frees them up to be strategic.
Right.
A decade ago, in their supply chain risk, they would have thousands of claims. Mm-hmm. They've worked, with their transport companies, with their own company, and today the losses are in tens.
Sure.
This is a case study, absolutely. Another first that I think they recently went upon was they called all their stakeholders, the insurers, the loss adjusters, their own people, their advisors, and they created a 5-year roadmap for the risk of their organization and for the insurance requirements of their organization. I have not seen people thinking so far ahead of time, and I think that's a great example. I have another example of a great risk manager who's right now in one of the top renewable energy companies in India. Earlier, when he was in a telecom company, they did the first global program, out of India.
Okay.
And I think that was a big landmark placement that they did. Today, as when he's running the risk for the renewable energy company, if you're doing wind energy, one of the biggest risks that you face today is that the suppliers of the wind turbines are going out of business.
Right.
But you have to run this turbine for the next 25 years. So how do you manage that? And as his company is changing the way they manage that risk, the kind of solutions that he's been able to get the insurance market to come up with. And it's a win-win-win situation for everyone. So that, again, I think speaks volumes for leadership and for foresight.
Sure.
And I'll give you one last example.
Please, sir.
There's another leader who's in a telecom company today. And, while they have, tens of losses, act of God, every kind of windstorm that you can imagine that impacts them, but they also have thousands of small losses. And this company, they actually note down each loss and they manage the risk and they manage their, they work to lower the actual impact of risk on their organization. And today they are working with all this data because they've got now data for many years. They're working with the insurance market to create completely new solutions, which have actually never been seen before in India. So these are some leaders, and I think you're seeing a lot of good work happening, and you'll see a lot more good work happening in the future.
Well, sir, I presume that these are all domestic examples.
Yes, absolutely.
What are some best practices that we could perhaps pick up from our counterparts abroad?
As companies get bigger, their risk becomes so large that you have concepts of what are called captive insurance, where a large part of the risk of the enterprise is retained in a sort of quasi-insurance company for that, because the premiums are so large that they can manage the risk themselves.
Right.
And we have started seeing Indian companies having interest in these kind of solutions, and I'm sure the regulator at the right time will make these kind of solutions available to corporate India.
And what more would you like to see by way of policy frameworks? How can India Inc. and the government essentially be better intertwined in this space?
I think the new IRDA regulator is doing all the right things. They are, really opening up the sector. I think the mission that they put the industry on is to make sure that every India is insured, and I think that's a very galvanizing vision for the entire industry. With this kind of a dynamic leader, what you will end up with is you will end up with the private and the public sector reacting and building out solutions and trying to achieve the vision that the regulator has set out. And we're all very excited.
So in the aftermath of the pandemic, we of course saw a sharp uptick in penetration rates when it comes to insurance, both in the personal as well as the corporate context, right? Now, what was your reaction at the time? And when you look back to what happened then, do you believe that we're better positioned today?
So pandemic showed us a couple of very important things. So at the corporate side, we were very good at taking care of the average claim. So someone who has a 2, 3, 4 lakh rupee claim, we were very good at taking care of that. But we were not very good at taking care of someone who has a 50 lakh rupee claim.
Right.
Someone's on a ventilator for 3 weeks. And the question really is that what do I really need insurance for? So that's something that holds you when you really fall off the cliff.
Of course.
So one, from the company side, I think two major trends have emerged after the pandemic. One is I think all companies want to understand is that, how do we really take care of our people when the worst possible thing in life happens to them? And so some of our clients have come up with very unique solutions. So there is a customer of ours who has an unlimited coverage for their employees, So, no matter what the amount is, if the person has a illness or an injury, the insurance will cover it. And I think kudos to the insurance industry also for innovating and providing a solution like that when the customer asked for it. So I think that shows that good ideas have a space in our industry.
Sure.
The other very major trend in corporate India is personalization. So what we would do in the past would be that everyone gets the same cover. But someone who's 21 and someone who's 51 have very different needs. They're in very different life stages. So I think after a lot of work at looking at what Gen Z wants versus what Gen X wants,
right.
I think we are now in a position where there are now maybe 100 companies that offer individual level customization and personalization of their insurance needs. So this can go in many different directions. So the company could say, my spend is X. You choose what you want with a certain minimum.
Sure.
But what we are finding is that there is this huge pent-up demand where individuals are willing to spend a lot more than what the company is spending from themselves if the options are made available to them.
Right, in their own pocket.
Because, people have suffered during the pandemic and they realize that there is a huge value and if someone is making it easily accessible to us, then we would like to, spend our personal money on it.
Of course.
At the individual level also, there are two major changes. One, the number of people who are buying individual insurance has really skyrocketed. I think you can see that in the results on the standalone health insurers. They are growing at 25, 35, 45%.
And that trend has maintained.
What also has changed is that people are buying much larger coverages, So people are buying super top-ups, people are buying higher limits. There are people who are buying global policies. There are people who are concerned that if my cancer is treatable in New York but not in Mumbai, then what do I do? So, and the insurance industry has a solution for all of these. And I think people are buying.
And sir, a moment ago you mentioned Gen X and Gen Z. So for aspiring risk management professionals or in-house insurance officers that may be watching this show, what words of advice might you have for them?
So I think I'm a big believer in apprenticeship. So I think find a risk manager that you really respect, work with them as part of the team and learn the nuances of the business because you have a great career ahead of you. This is an evergreen career. You are very unlikely to get fired or laid off. And this is a profession which is going to see a 10x growth in the next decade. So, the future is bright and you're doing a very important job and you're doing a very enriching job. So please come into this industry. We need you.
Well, sir, by way of closing comments, Prudent's Risk Management and Insurance Awards are right around the corner, which to our understanding is a platform that salutes and celebrates the accomplishments of risk management and in-house insurance professionals across corporate India. Tell us more about how the concept was brought to life and what you intend to achieve via this platform.
When we looked at the corporate world, we saw that there were, always recognitions for CEOs,
right.
So CFOs, and for HR heads, but there was no real recognition for risk professionals. And as a leader of the industry, we felt that, building the industry and bringing to light the important changes that are taking place in the industry is part of our core job. So we are very proud to be associated with honoring the leaders of this industry who are really keeping corporate India resilient. And we hope that this is a multi-year, long-term event that really showcases to the world the high-quality work that Indian risk managers are doing and gives them the rightful place in the sun.
So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us, and we wish you and the larger Prudent team all the continued success.
Thank you very much.